I guess without further ado, I'll hand it over to Marian and Melissa. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here.
For that opener. Everyone, Marian speaking. On the screen is a title slide with the title Future of Work and Disability Study Group, a case study on nugget.ai. I am joined here by Melissa Pike. Melissa, if you could say hi, everyone, to the group.
Hi, everyone.
And we are so honored and grateful to be here representing nugget.ai and to be in the same room as you all. We are truly grateful for the opportunity to discuss these topics with you and to help apply insights you have gained from previous modules through a real-world case study of nugget.ai's processes. Before we drill into that, we of course want to introduce ourselves in further detail. Switching slides, still Marian speaking here. On the slide now is a title, Who We Are. On the left side of the slide are two photos. The top photo is a headshot of me, and the bottom photo is a headshot of Melissa Pike. On the right side by our photos are brief descriptions of our role at nugget.ai. I'm Marian Pitel, will start with my description. I'm the head of research at Nugget, and simultaneously, I'm completing a PhD in organizational psychology at the University of Guelph. I'm currently calling in from the lovely city of Guelph. My background is in job simulations, so a method that aims to replicate the work activities of jobs through scenarios and role play exercises to better hire and develop employees. On my work days, which can be Monday to Sunday some weeks, I am balancing between my PhD and my role at Nugget. On my days off, you're likely to catch me enjoying the company of my loved ones, including my Adam, my incredibly supportive fiance, and decompressing from a busy work life.
So, hi everyone, Melissa speaking. I will now provide my description. I'm currently the Product and Research Associate at Nugget, and like Marian, also completing my PhD in Organizational Psychology at the University of Guelph. Funny enough, in addition to working together at Nugget and doing our PhDs together, Marian and I live together as well. So now you can imagine we have established a great work dynamic. Now moving specifically into my background, my research and experience has focused specifically on hiring and improving the hiring process for organizations and employees. The overlap between my research and my work at Nugget has made my experience in my PhD very unique, but very enjoyable all at the same time. Although I love the work I do in my free time, the foodie in me loves to enjoy a good meal and a glass of wine as I unwind.
So switching slides and Marian speaking again. On the slide, there's the title Nugget.ai. Below the title is an image of our logo, our company logo, which is a generic rendering of a gemstone representing special nuggets of information. Below this is a description of what we do as a company. What we do at Nugget is really leverage decades of organizational psychology research to build artificial intelligence algorithms that quantify and measure people's skills for hiring and employee development. We are first and foremost a technology company, a growing startup to be accurate, that has applications in the hiring and workforce management landscape. Our journey at Nugget has been really fascinating. I've been a part of this journey since the very beginning, which was 3 years ago, and Melissa has joined a little over a year ago now. And we have both been part of every pivot that we've had to do as a company, as a scrappy startup since the beginning. All of this to say that we as a company and our processes are not perfect, nowhere near perfect, in fact. We are learning each day, growing each day, pivoting, and that is one of the most frightening things, but also really exciting things about this whole experience. So switching slides again, on the screen is the title agenda with 2 bullet points underneath. The first bullet point reads, Real World Case Study with Nugget. As Arjun was mentioning earlier in the session, we really are asking you to take your lessons from the panels and the modules and really channel it towards reflecting on our processes as a company to be shown our decisions that we've made so far as a company helping other organizations hire talent, and to criticize our decisions. We are coming into this session with an understanding that we are still building the right kind of tech. So we're still in the process of building the tech that can solve the right problems in this space. We are far from perfect and are always eager to learn and pivot as needed. The second bullet point reads, 3 key stages of the nugget process. So for this session, we will be covering 3 main parts of the process that we engage in when we are working with any of our clients who are turning to us to help them hire new employees. For these sections, we'll provide an explanation for why we believe the stage is important, what we've considered in regards to that stage, and details on how we approach this stage today. When reflecting on each of these stages, we ask you to remember the homework sheet and the questions there on best practices and common challenges. We invite you to consider everything we're outlining about Nugget and determine which points align with best practices and which points align with common challenges faced by companies or hiring agencies. At the end of each section, we'll present some questions on the screen and dictate them as well, and open up the floor for discussions. We are ready to facilitate in multiple ways the discussions to allow for everyone to contribute in the manner and pace that they are most comfortable with. So if it means muting and unmuting to share, if it means raising your hand, using the raise your hand feature on Zoom, to use the chat box, or to even jot your notes offline so that you can send them after the session, we are open to any of these possibilities and more. We are truly just very grateful for the opportunity to have these discussions with you and understand and get an opportunity to understand your perspective on these matters. So switching slides, this is a title page that reads Identifying Important and Relevant Skills, which is the first main content section of today's session. So on the screen is a title that reads, what is this stage? The stage of identifying important and relevant skills is the process of understanding. Was there a question there? Sorry, just want to double check. Okay. So the stage of identifying important and relevant skills is the process of understanding what a company is looking for in their ideal candidate and what skills are needed to be successful in that role. Oopsies. Pardon me here. To some extent, this process of really understanding what a company is looking for is about scanning the position title. Say it's a customer success specialist role, and trying to understand what this role generically entails. One of our favorite ways to study different roles and occupations is using an online database called ONET. With ONET, we can identify what are the generic skills typically expected of any specific occupation, regardless of the specific company or even region that the placement is within. So if you were to take all of the customer success specialists in the world and try to pick apart what are the common skills between them, this is the information you would be able to gather through this approach. But of course, companies aren't just trying to find cookie cutter typical employees. Companies are often looking for a kind of profile that is uniquely suited for their culture, their team dynamics, their clientele profile. So often their ideal candidate does not cleanly fall into this kind of prototypical box. For example, IBM is a company that is notorious for liking recruiters and hiring managers who can sell. They want someone who can interview an applicant, and during the interview, they want the interviewer to be able to sell IBM to the interviewee. They want them to do such a good job of selling the image of IBM that an applicant who makes it past the hiring stages is very likely to accept the job. The skill of selling products and services is not a typical thing that people aim to find in potential recruiters, but at IBM as a company, this is actually very important. So all of this aims to highlight that identifying the relevant skills requires understanding both the prototypical profile of someone in that role, as well as the unique qualities that a particular company is aiming to find. Now, moving on to the next slide, the title on the screen is Why Do We Believe That This Step is Important? This stage is important because, as we discussed previously, failing to get an accurate understanding of this will lead recruiters and companies to look for prototypical employees, which are not always representative of all kinds of groups with different experiences and circumstances. Second of all, because the stage is at the top of the hiring funnel, it is the first step. It is crucial to aim to get this right, or else you can have cascading effects that introduce noise to the remaining stages in the hiring funnel. Getting things wrong at this level makes it difficult for you then to get things right at stage 2 and stage 3. And third, the more information you have at this stage to fine-tune what kind of profile you are looking for in your applicants, the more you are able to narrow down the pool of applicants. Imagine all of the information that you have on the job that a company is looking for is that they want someone with good communication skills. Say that is all you're working with. How many profiles are you able to filter out with that information? If you're starting at 100 applicants, you may still be left with 100 applicants if all you know is that they're looking for someone with good communication. Now compare this to if you are finding someone with good communication skills, good organization skills, experience in tech startups, and having worked in a product management role. You can start to narrow the list down a bit more. Of course, with that said, there is a fine and delicate balance between building this unique profile of the ideal candidate so that you're not casting a wide net versus being so specific that you are now hunting for this extremely rare unicorn or this extremely unique profile in the market. So it's a delicate balance between those two. Flipping slides, the title on the screen is What Have We Considered? Here we will be uncovering what considerations we have made as a company while building the functionalities to identify the skills important and relevant to a particular job. So first, we found that it's really difficult to distinguish between skills that are necessary and skills that are nice to have. When you scan a typical job ad, there are often attempts to differentiate between the must-haves and the bonus skills. For a company looking for a new data scientist, maybe it's critical that the candidate has the skills to operate SaaS software or R software, but it's a bonus for them to have skills operating Python software. In an ideal world, this is all neatly laid out in a job posting on LinkedIn or is clearly communicated by our contact at the company. But we found that that isn't always the case. Oftentimes, people make a distinction between must-haves and nice-to-haves in the way they write and lay out their job posting, but they're really only wanting to entertain candidates that have it all or more. To do this well, you really have to, to identify the relevant skills well, you really have to have an extremely clear understanding of what truly are required and what truly are a bonus. Something we've also come to learn about this step is that companies don't always have it figured out what skills they think are trainable and what skills are needed for you to get productive in the role on your first day. Tying back to our earlier discussion on requirements versus nice to haves, understanding which skills are actually trainable on the job so that you can focus more on the ones that need to be proficient before the candidate even starts the role is really important. What onboarding program is available to the candidate? What support programs, training, learning and development content? These are the skills that can be de-emphasized at the top of the hiring funnel. For our last point here, we want to talk about the concept of bona fide requirements. And just checking here, perhaps from David or Arjun or Gloria, to what extent has bona fide requirements been discussed in the previous modules so far, or anybody else in the group? So I think if it hasn't been discussed extensively, I will go into an explanation. I just didn't want to present, duplicate information if it's already been discussed before, but
I think,
it's
sorry to quickly jump in here. I think it would be good to maybe just go over it. Yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes. So essentially, bona fide requirements mean that something has been determined as a core requirement for that job. So for example, sometimes job postings will include a line that says, ideal candidate needs to be able to physically lift 50 pounds or more. And so anyone who does not meet this bona fide requirement, technically, the company can actually exclude them from the hiring process. So it's really the idea that there are essential, non-negotiable duties of a job. And in one sense, and this is reflected in legislation, both at the provincial and federal level in Canada. In one sense, this is great because the Supreme Court of Canada has come up with a 3-question test that allows the Human Rights Tribunal to determine if something that has been claimed as a bona fide requirement is indeed a core requirement of the job. The tricky thing here is that just because something is bona fide, it doesn't mean it is not discriminatory. It is technically the case that you can have a bona fide requirement that discriminates against groups of people, but if it is based on something deemed essential to the job, companies are allowed to exclude based on this rule. So we're finding that companies, whether consciously or subconsciously, are actually hiding behind these bona fide requirements when it comes to inclusive hiring and practices. So let us go over an example. And I will be switching the slide here. So on the screen is a quote, and we are sharing this with the group today in confidence, as this is actually something we've heard from a client. The quote reads, "I want to hire support personnel. One of the basic requirements is someone who can speak and write in fluent English, uninterrupted and with good flow." What are our thoughts on this? If I could open up the floor for some ideas from the group.
Hi, it's Mala. It discriminates against people who English is a second language or have a strong accent, and it allows employers to rule out a whole lot of people that might be, well qualified for the job in other ways other than language.
Thank you so much, Mala. And I see that your point is also being echoed by people in the chat box here. So Janet has said it excludes newcomers whose first language is not English and speak with an accent. And a comment here as well saying, what does this have to do with support? This is clearly a problem for ESL. And so exactly that, those were our thoughts as well when we were in conversation with this prospective client and this was stated to us. And Janet has also shared here that also folks with limited mobility or cerebral palsy that may affect their speech. Yes, and in addition to that, people with speech or language disorders like Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia could also be impacted in a negative way by something like this as a requirement. Now, the reason why we bring it up here after briefly discussing bona fide requirements is that although it is quite easy to see the negative drawbacks of having a requirement like this as part of a hiring cycle, with the guidelines today as dictated by federal and provincial legislation, companies can actually get away with claiming that something like this is a bona fide requirement. And so maybe I'm biased here because I work in a tech company, but because this study group has a focus on the future of work, I can't help but think of new technological advances that are being developed at a rapid rate, day by day, minute by minute, that actually enables and empowers people with different experiences and different circumstances to be able to accomplish work duties that otherwise decades ago wouldn't have been expected of them. Is it still fair today to judge someone on their ability to write in English when software like Grammarly is freely available? Is it still fair today to judge someone on their ability to lift heavy objects like computers and CPUs when laptops can be lighter than a cell phone nowadays, or when there is new technology that can help people lift objects? Why isn't the onus on companies to invest in or even consider technologies that allows them to tap into talent from all groups of people? So my take on the guidelines on the bona fide requirements, and I encourage all of our expert in the room today to scan these guidelines today, or at some point. And my take on it is that it needs updating to reflect new technological advances that can actually help us in the future of work. Switching slides here, and the title reads, "How do we approach this stage?" So far, we've discussed a lot what it entails to identify relevant skills, what considerations are important to make, and why it's important. Now we really want to take the time to let you know how we at Nugget approach this stage. So we've come to learn that the fastest way to get some level of understanding of what a company is aiming to find in their ideal candidate is through examining the job posting. A job ad, when done well, is helpful in communicating the skills that they're looking for in a nutshell. At Nugget, we've built 2 machine learning algorithms that can scan job ads to identify both the hard skills, which are the more technical, occupation-specific skills that often require formal training or experience, and the soft skills, which are the more adaptive life skills that allow you to get along with other people and are transferable across different occupations. But aside from these algorithms, we also manually evaluate the job ads to ensure that the results of our algorithms are accurate. In addition to this manual evaluation, we invite the hiring manager to discuss our insights. We use this conversation to confirm all of those things we have extracted from their job posting, such as the skills we identified as must-haves versus nice-to-haves. Did we get this right? Is there anything in addition to our list that you would like to add? We have even at times questioned them professionally and with a gentle approach on things that they have deemed essential that maybe aren't so essential. We think this part of the process is so critical as it allows us to not only align ourselves with the mind frame of the hiring manager, but also allows us to educate them on certain matters that they may not have just been privy to. So we have a question here in the chat about job ads. So the statement is, job ads can also be problematic. Is this considered neutral data by your company? So in a way, yes, we do acknowledge that job ads aren't perfect. And in fact, a lot of the work that we have put into building our algorithms that then are able to scan the job ads, the process of building those algorithms, we've factored into at that level the ways in which job ads can be problematic. So one example of that is when we're trying to build the components of the algorithm that get at communication. We have made it explicit in our job, which is labeling data to then go into those components of communication to veer away from any mention of fluency in English, right? Because we want to be able to build an algorithm that looks at a job ad and makes a claim for how well communication is needed for the role that has nothing to do with fluency in English or accents and what have you. So in our research as organizational psychologists, we come to learn the ways in which job ads can be biased, and we make explicit effort to make sure any algorithm we're building does not include those elements. What about Canadian experience? So we have another question here in the chat box about Canadian experience and how certain companies are looking for this very specific quality in people. Canadian experience is often, veiled with a desire to have somebody who is, familiar with culture that is reflected often by people who have been born and raised in Canada or even North America broadly. And in our experience, actually, in the data set that we use to build our algorithms, we didn't come across many instances in which Canadian experience was being highlighted as a requirement. But certainly because of the skills that we specialize in at Nugget, if it does come across in our training data set, it is not something that we include in the algorithms, because we're also aware of the ways in which immigrant populations and people who wouldn't identify as having such Canadian experience would feel that they would need to select out of the hiring process. So there's also questions here about having too many things in the job ad. So the kitchen sink approach, how do we filter that? So currently right now, our algorithms are in the early phases. So at this stage, our algorithms are taking in every piece of information that is being presented by the job ad that it has been specially trained to detect. So there are certain things that are our algorithms are better suited to capture, which are the hard skills and the soft skills that I mentioned. And so if a job ad has a lot of information on these hard skills and soft skills, it will indeed detect those pieces of information. But right now, there are other pieces of information that it isn't suitable to detect. So for example, volunteer experience, we haven't quite figured out a way to build our algorithms to get at those pieces of information like extracurricular activities and values and what have you. So in our roadmap, we do intend to build more comprehensive algorithms that get at those pieces of information. But when it comes to, if I'm trying to get to sort of the essence of this issue, we do use those conversations with our hiring managers as an opportunity to essentially say, here is your job ad. There's a lot of information here. It might be difficult for applicants to read this job ad and really get a clear understanding of what you're looking for. Here is our advice on how you can tweak your job ad to then better target the kinds of candidates you want to target. And so we do take it as an educational opportunity in that sense. And I think we'll cover one more topic here from the chat box, and then perhaps reserve some of the rest for after. Okay, or two more. So could you give an example of how a job ad might include a requirement for Canadian experience? So sometimes it actually explicitly states there that they're looking for somebody with Canadian experience. Like you can actually see it as a bullet point in a job ad, which is, to someone like me, it is very shocking to see that some people would still write something like this in their job postings, but you would be surprised to see the other stuff that we've seen as well when evaluating different job ads. Sometimes there's very sexist, information being represented, and it seems to miss the attention of anyone kind of reviewing the job ads. So there's also a question about a job ad that can highlight tasks such as driving, which an individual with, for example, person with visual disability may get excluded despite of meeting a requirement for the job. Yes, this is a perfect example of when sometimes bona fide requirements, when companies can hide behind this concept of bona fide requirement. Because if you were to refer to the 3-question test by the Supreme Court of Canada, companies can make a claim that the people they're looking for to occupy the role would need to have a driver's license, when in fact, because of new technology and new startups that actually allow driving and delivery and transport to be outsourced, it is a question mark to me as to whether companies actually truly do require this as a requirement, as essential to the job. And you have here, why do AI candidates need to verify analysis with a hiring manager? I thought hiring managers usually make decisions regarding any kind of analysis. So for us, to give some further context on that, to us, we think it's really important to have that conversation with the hiring manager with our initial set of analyses based only on the job posting. Because again, it's with the understanding that identifying relevant skills to the job is sort of, it is at the top of the hiring funnel. We want to make sure we get that right so that we avoid any cascading effects down the pipeline. For us, we see AI as not standing for artificial intelligence. In our core and in our essence, we see it as standing for augmented intelligence. So we are never in pursuit of replacing a hiring manager's job and their decision making. We always want to be making decisions alongside them. So we do at multiple stages recruit representatives of the companies that we work with to be able to make sure we're always aligned and we're always answering questions in a way that is helpful to them. So that's sort of our reasoning for always involving the hiring manager in these decisions. Okay, so just scanning the last few comments here in the chat. So as a hiring manager, I note that a good 70% of applications come from other countries. It would be good to capture those sexist, racist, and ableist elements of job postings and do research on them. Good academic work to be done, which is challenging when we need a person that is local. I am not sure how we get around this. It's not to be racist or to discriminate. It's to the service being in that location. Yes, so we definitely agree that it is a good idea to capture the sexist, racist, and ableist elements of job postings. In fact, if I may share, Melissa Pike here, her dissertation will actually be on bias in job ads. And ultimately, I'll let you speak to that in a bit if you'd like to share a little bit more details. But for us at Nugget, we really are pushing to build a job description, job posting recommendation algorithm where, outside of the products and the services we offer, we want it to be open source so that anyone can upload their job posting and be able to get recommendations in real time as to how they can, what words, what phrases are being flagged, what words or phrases are actually really great, and be able to kind of move towards that. So about the applications coming from other countries and it being a challenge when you need a person that's local. Yes, that's also something that we've faced as an issue. Sometimes we do find that our best candidates can be somebody from far abroad, and it's for us, it's a matter of the fact that it's fascinating that you're acknowledging that there is talent elsewhere in the world. We find that some of our clients are so focused on hiring locally, but without due reasons. Sometimes it's just a desire to keep them local so that you have the opportunity to see them in person. But given the circumstances that we've had to deal with as a world, I do encourage, we always strongly encourage companies to consider if positions have to be local, if they truly have to be local, or if there are remote work arrangements that can actually be implemented so that you can be able to tap into talent from anywhere in the world. So yes, that is also something we've found and we've realized in our work as well. And we're always encouraging companies to be able to consider different arrangements and options that aren't necessarily the ones that require them to look within a certain region for talent. Okay. Thank you so much for your engagement, everybody. So just switching slides again here. On the screen is an image. It is a screenshot of the page on the Nugget app where the hiring manager can post their job. There are different fields where they can enter the job title, the location of the placement, or if it's remote, the link to their original posting on their company website, and so forth. So this is the page that the hiring manager would see when they're uploading information about the job that they're looking for a candidate for. Our algorithms are working behind the scenes. So our algorithms are scanning these job ads, they're analyzing this information. And so the operations don't get to be seen by the hiring manager, but they are working 24/7 in the background. Yes, so there is the challenge of, so something more in the chat box here, just to read this out loud. It is challenging when a person is needed to be local. It is unclear how to get around this. It's not to be racist or to discriminate, it's due to the service being in that location. For global multinational companies, this may be easy. However, small to medium-sized businesses don't have the resources for some of these applicants to pay for visas and all of that. One thing I have seen, Christopher, that gets around the need to sort of sponsor a new employee full-time is through platforms like Upwork, where work is actually it's subcontracted, and platforms like Upwork usually manage the sort of logistics of being able to connect talent and opportunities from anywhere, any region. So that is one thing I've seen small to medium-sized businesses do to actually get around, needing to sponsor somebody full-time, go through all of that paperwork. So that's maybe something top of mind that I can share as something I've seen that has worked for other businesses, if that's helpful. Okay, so this leads us to sort of the conclusion of the first section, which is identifying the skills that are important and relevant to the job. I've switched the slides here, and the title on the screen reads discussion, and there are 3 sections. A lot of discussions we've had sort of throughout, which is wonderful. I appreciate your engagement and your participation. The questions that are on the screen, I'm going to read them out loud, and if you have anything to share about the first question or the third question, like we don't have to go in any particular order. But the first question reads, what are your general reactions to this information? The second question reads, what are the pros and cons of the approach that we at Nugget have taken when it comes to identifying the skills relevant to the job? And the third question reads, are there any interesting insights from your homework on this section that you would like to share with the group right now? So there is a question from Chris Butler. Are global international companies included as well? Could you clarify for us, Chris, as to a little bit more about the context of this question, please?
I was only interested if they were also included with the global companies.
Yes, I think certainly global international companies can definitely also work towards being able to consider talent from areas that are not local to them, certainly, and even consider, so I know when I was sharing the option to consider platforms like Upwork to subcontract talent globally, it's not only for small to medium-sized businesses, certainly global international companies, larger companies, enterprises can also consider that approach. I've seen that as well. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts, questions, comments at this point? Well, so there's a question from Janet. Is simple language one of the filters? Is this a question about the filters that we use at nugget.ai? So for us, simple language is not something that we sort of capture right now. And in fact, from my experience, I don't know if you have different experiences, Melissa, when actually analyzing the data set that we use to train our algorithms, we didn't come across any instances where simple language was something that was used as a filter. There's a comment from Mala about liking the approach to job skills and job duties. Thank you for that feedback. And then there's a follow-up from Janet about an AI translator being incorporated.
Audio now unmuted.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So if I can, yeah, I think my sense of sort of the couple of questions here in the chat, and please realign me if my understanding is incorrect, is that there's mention of AI translators. So can AI translators be incorporated? That's from Janet. From Mala, it says, many jobs ask for French. Can AI be used to learn French? That is a fascinating question. So thus far in our work, when thinking about sort of bona fide requirements, like I mentioned previously, we thought about sort of how Grammarly, which is this open source software that you can download as an extension on Chrome, you can actually use that so that every time you're writing a message, whether it's on Facebook or it's an email or it's in a Word doc, it actually scans your writing and then makes suggestions for how to make spelling or grammar better, or how to change your tone so that it's more professional, for example. So far, those are the AI enhancements that we've considered in our line of work. And actually, when we go into Melissa's section and she talks about how we measure skills, one thing that we do at Nugget is we don't mandate our users to disable Grammarly when they're going through our assessments. They're welcome to actually use it in their own work. But we haven't considered using sort of AI translators or language translators to help with somebody's role. I see a future where that could be the case, where if they're looking for somebody who can communicate in French, maybe somebody doesn't even have to know that language and be proficient in it. They can instead use technological advances to support their work. I can definitely see a future like that. So sorry, Janet has clarified that the question is about translating a regular job ad and put it through a simple language filter or translator. I think that is a fantastic idea. That is something that I would love to apply in our work. It is not necessarily an avenue that we've sort of explored deeply, but I think that would be a really, really great thing to add to our roadmap and really move towards. There is a comment on Ramin about creating a profile on Upwork. The AI rejected the application. I'm so sorry to hear that, Ramin. If there's anything that we can support with sort of after the session, we can definitely work with you on that. That is, it's not great to see, but we can definitely support. I think, so if it's all right, I think we can move along to the second section, and we'll have an opportunity later on to discuss anything else that is remaining or outstanding. Thank you.
All right, now it is Melissa speaking, and we are moving on to the next slide. And this slide is a title slide with the section titled Measuring Skills. So for this section, I will be discussing the measuring skills component of our session. So switching slides, the title on the screen reads, "What is this stage?" Sorry, we have Isabel, you have a comment you want to add in before we move on?
Can I unmute?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
It's a bit tricky for me to figure out how to write it. I'm just getting this feeling that perhaps your system or these systems like yours are designed for what would be considered quote unquote, with big huge air quotes, standard candidates, and then that you're trying to find ways in which there's discrimination and ways to try to mitigate those aspects of discrimination, instead of another approach might be to actually design a system specifically for those who are, I guess, what would be considered less standard or more atypical candidates, so that it's actually built for diversity instead of trying to correct for diversity after. I'm just wondering if you might address that, or maybe you were going to address it at some point.
Yeah, no, of course. I think that that is a really viable comment and something that we have not yet explored at Nugget. But I do agree, as Marian had mentioned earlier, with the idea that I'm going to, in my own research, be looking at some of the discriminatory things that are present in job ads, that it would be a good avenue to use information like that and try to actually create an algorithm that is more specifically for people that might be disadvantaged by these job ads. I think that's a very great suggestion and a good point, and something that we would have be worthwhile considering on our end. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, moving on to the slide that we have presented here about what is this stage in terms of measuring skills. So the stage of measuring skills for Nugget AI involves the process of measuring the skills necessary for a candidate to be successful in a role. So once we have identified which skills are necessary for a job or for a specific role in a company, we have to identify the best ways to assess incoming candidate skills. So companies have the option often to pick between a large selection of hiring tools to assess their candidates. But just because there are lots of methods out there to choose from does not mean that all hiring tools are created equally. When a method is selected to measure candidate skills, companies or developers of hiring tools such as us must consider which methods will truly allow a candidate to best show themselves off to a company that is engaging in the hiring process. So methods that allow a candidate to accurately demonstrate their skills will provide the candidates the opportunity that they need to demonstrate that they are well suited for a job. And we also need to ensure that the methods used for skills measurement are accurately linked to job performance to ensure that companies are hiring candidates that can perform well in the necessary domains for a job. So switching to the next slide with the title, why do we believe that this step is important? So when we look at measuring skills, first, we want to consider the fact that the future of work is truly a skills economy. So companies are coming to realize that it is more important to focus on the skills a candidate has that will allow them to perform well on the job and place less onus on what school a candidate has gone to, the grades that they have received, and what degree they have, because these things are less important for job performance. So by examining skills specifically, we and the company that is undergoing hiring are focused more on the capabilities that are needed in a role, as opposed to those that are irrelevant and not predictive of how well a candidate will actually do on the job. So it is important to think about whether the company has considered different arrangements for the job so that a spectrum of capabilities are captured for that role, and focus on the fact that the person can actually do what is required for the job. So focusing on skills as opposed to more irrelevant information should help companies narrow their focus onto what is important. Sorry, just looking at a question presented by Chris here. Chris asks, I thought measurements are a type of skill. I think in certain jobs that there are technical skills that rely on actually measuring things. So I do agree there that measurements can be considered a type of skill in a specific job role. So here we're thinking about measuring things like someone's hard skills, as Marian talked about earlier, or their soft skills. So for example, let's say you're trying to measure if someone is a good leader or is good at teamwork. So when we're talking about measuring skills, those are the kind of skills that we are focused on talking about, finding methods to be able to measure. So more specifically, some of the things like the soft skills. this, you are correct, Chris, that measurement is definitely a typical kind of technical skill. So thank you for helping us to clarify that further. So moving on to the second point on the slide, if we are, things that we consider in terms of importance are that if we are able to measure skills well, that we can get a more accurate understanding of what capabilities a person actually has. So regardless of how well a company understands what a job entails that they are hiring for, if they're not clear of the skills profile of people in their candidate pool, it is going to be like rolling a dice to match people with an opportunity that is actually appropriate for them. So we want to help companies to be able to find the right people for the job based on our skills measurement. Just looking at the chat here. No worries, Kevin, on being late. But to address Sybil's comment, so I think they're asking how can they compare a list of people to figure out who is the most or least skilled in a certain area. So depending on the measurement, this could be done in a variety of ways. Some of the things that we talk about, and I'll discuss a little bit more in depth later, are something like a work sample where you're putting someone in a work-based scenario. And let's say you're asking them to be put in a conflict scenario and then respond to something that a colleague or manager has said. So by putting them in that scenario, you can look at how they are engaging with their manager to determine, let's say, how good they are in terms of their interpersonal skills with someone. Are they dealing with them by yelling back? Are they dealing with them in a calm manner in terms of the words that they are using? So something like that in terms of trying to differentiate based on their responses to be able to see their skills level. Another question here, how can we measure writing and reading skills when Grammarly are used throughout the application process? So this is a very good question and something that we have been considering ourselves. One of the things that we never want to do is tell people to disable something like Grammarly, because we know that if you do have English as a second language, or there is something that could be disadvantaging in terms of your communication, that has nothing to do with your actual ability to communicate. So something like your grammar, something about minor things in your spelling, we don't want someone to have to turn that off, because it is something, a function that people can use in their day-to-day life when they are writing an email, when they are communicating in that manner. So we are trying to focus a little bit less on things like grammar, like spelling, and focus more on the idea that they are communicating and the ideas across clearly, because often when someone is communicating, and when we've looked at the literature in regards to communication, that it is more important that people are able to really get the gist of their idea across, as opposed to things like spelling and grammar. But that's a great question. And then for the final point on this slide, in terms of why we believe that skills measurement is important, is that we believe it is important for candidates to be able to be convinced themselves that they are being chosen or not chosen for a job opportunity for the right reasons. So for example, if a company only asks a candidate to list where they've been working for the past 5 years, and what their job title was on their intake form, what is this company actually basing their hiring on? Are they only focused on the prestige of the company or the prestige of the role that the candidate was a part of? Because these pieces of information often don't tell a company much about a candidate and can actually bias their judgment of a candidate, making the company believe the candidate is going to be successful simply because they worked in a top-notch firm and not based on the skills that they actually demonstrate. So we do not believe as a company that this is enough information to make an informed decision about a candidate. And we think it is important to measure the candidate's skills so they are able to be truly chosen or not chosen based on their fit for that job and not pieces of non-irrelevant information that the company could focus on. Janet has a comment here. I think soft skills such as leadership, identifying the number of years in a leadership management position or post-team they led may be more accurate. I think this is definitely something to consider. Obviously, if someone has been in a leadership role for a long period of time, they will have had the ability to gain experience in leadership. But one of the things that we like to consider is that when you look at how someone would engage in a leadership scenario, if they are able to demonstrate those behaviors of leadership, then just because they haven't been in a leadership role before doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't be able to be a good leader. So I do definitely think that it is valid that someone's years of experience in a leadership role could be telling of their leadership. There's also different ways that this could be examined to give someone the opportunity to be put in a leadership position if they have not been put in a leadership position before. So Catherine makes the comment, someone could have a lot of volunteer experience and gain skills in those roles, such as leadership or problem solving, but the employers don't always look or pay attention. There could be more comparisons like that made in the hiring process. I definitely agree that I think some people can be overlooked because of things like volunteer experience and people not realizing that they could have been in a leadership role and their experience could be very valid. And that's why we do try to focus sometimes a little bit less on things like that and be able to just demonstrate that the candidate can demonstrate those skills, because it is very unfortunate when employers do overlook experiences that are very valid to show that they have leadership skills that they could bring to the job, which is very important. Seville says the number of years can also be discriminatory. Sometimes people can be leaders for a long time and not be good at it. And this is a very, very valid point, because as we know, that there are a lot of leaders even that are discussed in media that have been in positions for a long period of time and are not necessarily good, ethical, caring leaders. So there are people who could have been in this position and not necessarily treated their employees with respect. So that is a very valid point to the fact that just because someone is in a leadership experience, it doesn't mean they're, for a long period of time, does not necessarily mean that they are a great leader and demonstrate good leadership skills. So what this is. Oh yeah, no, yeah, sorry. So Runa, you make a very good question in the chat here. So role, responsibilities, and required skills could change after a candidate gets a job based on business needs and requirements. So how can we measure skills for the changing world? So very, very good comments. One of the things that we do try to do at Nugget is right now we have some soft skills that we've demonstrated and ONET has also demonstrated are important across a variety of jobs. So what we try to do is look at skills that are more applicable to a wide variety of jobs. But one of the things that would be good to do, especially if we are working within a specific company, is if we have an idea of levels a specific job is looking for, let's say in teamwork or in leadership, to be able to make adjustments to the what is being looked for in candidates to be able to take that into account. Because it's a very valid comment that in the current world we are living, jobs change all the time. We need to be able to account for the fact that these jobs may change, and as jobs change, even looking to assess your current employees, and do they need training? Are there different things that your current employees will need to change as the job changes specifically? So I think that's a very, very important question. Catherine, very good comment in the chat about volunteering can be discounted by friends and family, not even just employers, which is very, very, very true and unfortunate. Chris, why would volunteering be discounted? Very good question. From our standpoint, we don't necessarily think that this should be the case, but in dealing with employers, we've definitely had times where they just, for some reason, don't see it as the technical work experience that they are looking for, or they don't understand to how it could be as valid to the current work that's being done. So if someone is put in a leadership position, they might not think that maybe they've been put under the same amount of pressure, they haven't dealt with the same amount of subordinates and things like that. So often employers will just not think of how relevant that kind of experience could be, and then not take it into account, which is unfortunate, but a good comment.
What if it was over threshold?
Sorry, Chris, can you repeat that?
What if it was over threshold?
Do you mind clarifying one more time?
Sorry about that.
What if it could be over threshold?
I'm just supporting Chris. You're saying as opposed to under pressured, it's over pressured?
Oh, yes. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I think that would, it might just be from the organizational standpoint that they don't understand kind of what it was entailing in that role, regardless if they were under a lot of pressure or over a lot of pressure. So I think it's really just from the company standpoint that they often don't understand the experience that came with that volunteer experience, and will make them discounted as a result. So very good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Sybil. How do you measure when overconfidence is an issue that can bias how candidates present themselves? If a less confident candidate gets a job and it goes well, their confidence could grow and they may perform more well than expected. An overconfident candidate may be fixed in their ways of doing things and sometimes may be less open to adapting to needs on the job, or experiences of discrimination can impact confidence. I think this is such a great question because it is very, very true. I guess the question is how potential is measured. Yeah, so when it comes to overconfidence and underconfidence, I think there is a large impact on how people present themselves, especially in things like an interview context. From how we deal with measuring skills, given the fact that it is computer-based, which has its disadvantages, and we definitely can talk about that, but it is something that someone can do from the context of their own home. And something at me and Marian push for is to try to make these challenges and work samples not time-based. One of the things that we always have been trying to do is to make it so that someone is in the comfort of their own home. They're able to use their own computer, their machine, to complete this work sample. And if we're able to have it in not a timed environment, then it gives people the best of their ability to just demonstrate their skills, hopefully to have less of an effect on the confidence that they actually have in demonstrating those skills. That being said, I still think that when you're presenting someone with a work case scenario, that confidence will come into play. So I think this is definitely something that we need to consider moving forward as we go to try to improve our selection assessments or hiring assessments. because we don't want someone to be disadvantaged just because they have experienced previous discrimination or because this scenario reduces their confidence to demonstrate their ability. So I think that is such a great question and something that we definitely need to consider moving forward. From Runa, what do employers mean by overly qualified, and how can AI deal with overly qualified candidates? So I think from a employer perspective, often when they're talking about someone who is overly qualified, they think about someone who has too many years of experience in a specific field. And often, which is unfortunate, but from their perspective, they don't think that someone is going to be either excited in this role or willing to take the salary that they are willing to give a candidate. So I think that is often what employers consider when they think overly qualified. In terms of how can AI deal with overly qualified candidates, that I think is a very good point. I don't know if I have a great answer for this one specifically, given the fact that often it's from the organizational perspective in terms of what they are looking for and considering to what them deeming who is overqualified versus underqualified. But I think what could be helpful from an AI perspective is if they are if they're not focusing on things like explicitly like resumes, and if they're looking at things more like the skills that that person can demonstrate, you're able to pay attention to just what that person can do as opposed to what makes them over versus underqualified for that job, because they're able to demonstrate that they have the skills if they're put in that job, if they're put in a scenario related to that job, that they can perform the way that they need to perform. So I think that can be a way for AI to help us move away from the idea of over versus underqualified, that if you can demonstrate that you have the skills for that job, it shouldn't matter if you have more years of experience than that person or that organization is actually looking for. Thank you guys for all of your questions. Your engagement has been incredible throughout this experience. So we absolutely love it, and we are happy for you guys to keep this up as we move forward. So moving on to the next slide. This slide is titled, "What have we considered?" So when we are looking at measuring the skills of candidates, thank you, Chris. Sorry, thank you for saying that that wasn't a bad answer or response. I very much appreciate that. So now, yeah, moving on to what we have considered as a business in terms of measuring skills. So first thing that we have thought about is, what are different skills measurement methods? So in the area of hiring, as I've mentioned previously, there is a large variety of assessment tools that can be chosen. But some of the methods we have considered have been things like resume screening, self-report questionnaires, which is when a candidate self-reports on their own skills, situational judgment tasks, which present candidates with a fictitious work scenario or a fake work scenario and get the candidates to choose between response options to demonstrate what they should or would do in a specific scenario. And we've also considered work samples, which I have talked about a little bit, which are similar to situational judgment tests, but the candidate is presented with a task to complete in a work-based scenario instead of just selecting response options that are provided to them. So each of these different methods really can present different advantages and disadvantages. And so this is things that we want to consider when deciding which ways we want to measure candidates' skills. The second thing that we have considered is, are skills compensatory? So in other words, if you have one kind of skill, does that make up for a lack of another skill? Or is it the case that all the skills that we want to measure, or the different kinds of soft skills, are unique, and they're all themselves important and necessary for a position. So for example, can a candidate's ability to cooperate well with others make up for something like their deficiency to delegate tasks to other people? Or is there any kind of skill that could make up for their deficiency to delegate and give out tasks to others? So on a similar line of thinking, does a candidate need to possess each of these skills to actually perform the job, or is this not the case? So this is definitely something that we needed to consider when we were figuring out how we wanted to measure each of these skills. Then the final thing that we considered is the comparison group, which ties to Chris's question. So I'll kind of go through the content and then go over to that. So what is the right comparison group for us to compare candidates' scores to? So when we think about trying to determine what skills a candidate has to perform the job, who should we compare them to demonstrate if they do have those skills? So do we compare them to current professionals in the job? Should they be compared to candidates who have taken the assessment previously? What about others in the same industry, or people who are star performers in a specific company? So different kinds of comparisons will provide different types of information about the candidate and how well they perform on the job. So it is important for us to determine what information is actually the most valuable when choosing who we want to compare a candidate to. So Chris's question was, is there a difference in the right and wrong comparison group? So from our perspective, in terms of who you are comparing the candidate to, it just depends on the kind of information that you are looking to get. So if you're wanting to see how well they will perform in a current job in a specific company, it might be best to compare to employees in that specific company. If you want to know if they would do well, let's say in the sales industry, you might want to know more comparison to that specific industry. So depending on the information that is going to be viewed as most valuable can help determine maybe what is the right comparison versus what can be the wrong comparison. So it really just depends on the information that you're looking for. Sybil, do you have a list of skills measurement methods and which skills they work best for? I don't understand. How are you defining compensatory skills? Are you only hiring tech people? So first, in terms of skills measurement methods and which skills they work best for, we don't currently have that encompassed in our slides, but we'd be more than happy to provide a list to the group in terms of some of those methods and what skills they are better suited for. There is definitely some literature out on that, so we could definitely help to give a list for that. In terms of how we're defining compensatory skills, so essentially when you look at whether a skill is compensatory, it's the idea of, can you take, if you were to take one skill, replace it with another, are you able to gain that same information about the candidate regardless of the skill that is actually being measured? So if it was not compensatory, that means these two skills, you're getting unique information from each of them, and you want to make sure that you're measuring both. But if they are compensatory, that would mean that you only need to measure one of them and you're getting a lot of the same information, and it's not necessarily important or necessary to measure both of those skills. In terms of are we only hiring tech people, is this in reference to Nugget specifically doing hiring or doing hiring for other organizations? In terms of doing hiring for other organizations, we do it for a variety of different industries. So we do hiring for things like the consulting industry, the sales industry, for marketing, a variety of different types of industries currently. Thank you, David, for your comment about we are learning how a new startup company is working, and based on that, we are going to write a white paper with recommendations. And Sybil, is compensatory the same as redundance? Redundancy is a good thing when it comes to reducing discrimination. People's skills get highlighted in some ways and not others. I think there is definitely some similarity in terms of compensatory and redundant. And a very, very good point in terms of redundancy being a good thing when it comes to reducing discrimination. This is something that is very important for us to consider. We do, I think, have some skills that we've been looking at in our skills model, like teamwork and interpersonal skills that do tend to have some redundancy and some compensatory behaviors, which I would say are very similar things. And it's a good thing for us to consider moving forward as we do try to make sure we are encompassing more skills, that we are focusing on things that can help to reduce discrimination. So thank you very much for that comment. That's a very great thing for us to consider. Sybil, do you want to come in with your comment in relation to interpersonal and team skills?
Sure. Just really briefly, that's really interesting example because I think it does illustrate the problem with redundancy. So one of the conversations that happened, I think last week in our group was how sometimes folks with disabilities end up being, for whatever reason, really good at being the glue in a team that fills in the gaps and helps teams get things done. However, like interpersonal skills as a measurement can be quite discriminatory against folks who have, for example, social, autistic or other kinds of folks who have might have like if it's a measurement, kind of what is interpersonal, measuring interpersonal behavior could show up in a negative light, but actually in a team-based environment could be super important at helping the team actually get things done and supporting other team members.
That's an amazing comment. Thank you for sharing. And that's something that's great for us to think about and consider as we were considering even these specific skills moving forward. So thank you so much. It's a very insightful comment. So thank you for sharing. Moving on to Janet's comment, or question, sorry. Is that this algorithm mostly work for folks at certain level of education seeking more established traditional roles? What about the gig economy type jobs? Also, what specific filters have been put in place to support folks who are neurodivergent in autism spectrum and folks with developmental disabilities? So looking first at the beginning of this question in terms of, is this mostly for people seeking more traditional type jobs versus gig economy type jobs? Right now, we have been focusing a little bit more on specific industries that we would be hired from specific companies, focusing on maybe more of the traditional jobs. But the way that we are actually moving our tools is towards more general scenarios. So regardless of whether this was for the gig economy or more traditional jobs, that we would be able to look at skills assessment in these jobs. We also do have some work samples currently that are more generic in terms of just looking at leadership or putting you in more of generic scenarios and looking at how you can demonstrate your skills, which would be more applicable to any kind of job, regardless if it is gig economy or a traditional level job. So we are definitely moving and pushing to go towards not just those traditional jobs, but also be more encompassing of, regardless of the job, that we are able to measure your skills. And then looking at the second half of your question, are there specific filters that have been put in place to support folks with who are neurodivergent? Currently in our methods, unfortunately, we do not have those filters in place, but we are, as we have said and Marian has mentioned, continuously looking to add in things like that to help to avoid and reduce discrimination for all of conditions such as that. So we would love to hear any of your thoughts in terms of how we can move towards doing that. It's definitely something that we want to continue to do, and we are always looking to improve our methods for those purposes. Another comment from Janet. This is a tough one, but since we have legislation in Ontario that identifies attitudinal barriers as something that needs to be identified, eliminated, and prevented, what algorithm can be put or filtered to assess attitudinal variables or barriers, sorry? Janet, would you be able to further define what you mean by attitudinal barriers?
Gladly. The AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, has as per mandate to identify, eliminate, and prevent barriers. And they go one step further, specifically to identify physical barriers, process and procedures, and attitudinal barriers. And anyone with a disability will tell you that that is not only the biggest barrier, but the longest standing barrier. The attitude of employers to look at the void rather than the skill, to look at the disability rather than the attitude of the worker. So the legislation says we need to identify and eliminate attitudinal barriers, the attitude, but we don't have an attitude police. So how can we, in a practical, that's what I said, this is a tough one. How can we, using AI, kind of implement something? It could be anything like, what have you done in the past? For example, have you hired people with disabilities before? What accommodations do you currently have in place? Just to filter if this is an employer who's already thinking accessibility, who's already thinking, how can I offer employments to everyone? So it would be sort of like, what have you done in the past that can indicate to me that your attitude is open to welcome folks with different abilities?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a really, really great comment, especially when it comes to employers. There can be a lot of bias that can come through in terms of attitudinal barriers. So thank you for defining that for me specifically. And Sybil has also added the importance of information and communication barriers that can be a way in which attitudinal barriers can be expressed. So pro-equity environment, so having a lot of information and communication barriers and resist reducing them. So from a organizational standpoint, I think one of the things that can be helpful is trying to have things like the skills assessment that are more focused on just that specifically, demonstrating that you have the skills for a specific job. Because often my concern would be that people would look at could look at a person with disabilities and then just see that as opposed to what their skills are specifically. Whereas often, unfortunately, more things like interviews are a lot more prone to bias and things like that. So being able to use AI to help people actually demonstrate why they are good for the job without having so many of those interactions that could put a negative bias or allow the organization to have more negative bias be demonstrated in the hiring process.
Perhaps maybe it's just perhaps this is a last thing.
Yeah. So just for the last comment, for the sake of time, Sybil added, I wonder what it would be like for your company to hire people with disabilities, especially those who've worked in supporting people with disabilities to find employment. I think this is something that's very important. And as we grow as a business, we definitely need to consider, because having all of your input we're so happy hearing about anything in relation to this helps to inform us, helps us to improve, helps us to move forward. But having someone on the team that could consistently help us to reduce these kind of barriers in the tools that we do use would be absolutely invaluable. It would be so great for us to have on the team. So I think that's a very great comment and something that we definitely need to consider moving forward as we grow as a business. So thank you very much for that.